Good afternoon. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines, a weekly series from the Post and Courier, where we take you behind the scenes with the journalists who are on the ground covering the stories that you're reading about in the paper. I'm happy to have you here today on this Thursday afternoon. Our topic this afternoon will be going back to school. A lot of interesting twists and turns this year, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Before we introduce the panelists and jump into today's topic, just wanted to remind everybody that you will receive an email at the end of this session with a recording of the sessions. If you want to share it with anyone, who missed, you can do that. There will also be links to various stories that we talk about here, contact information for the journalists, etc. So keep an eye out for that, and that'll be coming at the end of this session. Of course, we want to thank everybody here who is a subscriber or a donor to our investigative fund. We couldn't do this work without you. Thank you. If you are not already a subscriber or a donor, we would really encourage you to consider that. postandcourier.com/subscribe or postandcourier.com/donate. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to jump right on. Mitch Pugh, I'm the executive editor here at the Post and Courier, and joined by three journalists covering education across the state of South Carolina. With three very different districts, but a lot of the similar questions and concerns as we go back to school, really for the first time in force since the pandemic began. So we're joined today by Adam Benson in our Columbia office. He works out of Columbia with the Post and Courier Columbia. We have Stephanie Mirah, who is in Greenville and is working out of the Greenville Post and Courier office. And then also here in Charleston, Libby Standord, who covers education in the Charleston County region. So let's jump right in. And normally I would maybe do a little bit of introductions and whatnot, but I think we've got a lot to get to today. So we had a little breaking news just about 30 minutes ago. So I'm going to start with Libby. Libby, and this kind of dovetails the question we got from one of our readers ahead of time, Jenny McGraw. She was very confused about some of the messaging that's come out from Charleston County Schools since a couple days ago, the board voted 8-1 to implement some sort of mask requirement in Charleston County Schools. But as you've learned in the last 24 hours, that's become a lot more complicated maybe than folks thought, or we're not really exactly sure what's happening. But I'll kind of kick it to you there. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned today and the story that just posted at 11:30 about the complications with enforcing this in the Charleston County School District.
Yeah, so since school started on Wednesday, we've had lots of kind of confusion and messages of people just not really sure what's happening. So on Monday, as we said, the board voted to implement a mask requirement. And then for a lot of people who were, pro-mask, that was very exciting for them. And for people who are anti-mask, it was, not as exciting for them. And then as it kind of unfolded the next day, the district had to kind of figure out their legal strategy with all of this because there is a proviso or amendment to the South Carolina budget that basically says that districts cannot use public funds to implement mask mandates. And so now they're trying to figure out what that means for the district. It's still pretty unclear how it's actually playing out in the school. So a lot of parents have heard kind of through the grapevine that principals were told that they would not have to enforce the masks in the schools. And the official word we've heard from both the board and Superintendent Postlewaite is basically that the school district won't be turning away any students or denying students access to their education if they're not wearing a mask. But they do expect and hope that everyone would wear a mask inside during classes and in the hallways and basically anytime they're indoors at schools. So we're trying to get more clarification from the district on what exactly this means. But right now that's kind of where it stands, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and to see how other districts kind of approach this, because Charleston County isn't the only one who decided to go against the governor's proviso. So
yeah, it sounds from what I saw of your story, Libby, it sounds like at this point it's more of a strongly worded suggestion than an actual mandate, but I guess we'll find out some more. And so I'm going to kick it over to Adam, who covers Richland and Lexington County, where I don't want to call it a revolt, but the decision to maybe defy the state lawmakers kind of got started. Tell us what's happening with mask mandates or suggestions in Lexington and Richland right now.
Yeah, so a lot of your Charleston readers might be hearing about Richland 1 more often than they're used to for that exact reason. The city of Columbia, before just a couple of weeks before the schools got involved, declared a state of emergency within the municipal limits, saying any children between the ages of 2 and 14 needed to wear masks because obviously they can't be vaccinated. So then all eyes turned to Columbia, sort of, putting that state proviso to the test. And of course, the natural question was, well, what are the schools going to do? Richland County Council followed suit a couple of weeks later, also saying that masks need to be worn in schools, all schools, which gave Richland 1 and 2 political cover to say, hey guys, we have to follow what our city and our county are telling us. Although some people, the question was, well, does state law supersede local law? But be that as it may, what that means is in Richland 1 and 2, which educate more than 50,000 students total, masks are in play in buildings, whether you like it or not. Now, the interesting thing is Lexington County, all of Lexington County districts are mask optional right now. Lexington and Richland 5, which straddles both the counties, has said that since half their schools are in Lexington County, half the schools are in Richland County, for the interest of consistency, they are going to stick with the governor, the budget proviso saying masks optional. As of even this morning, I was asking my districts and some folks in Lexington County whether that could change based on a town or a council vote, and I've not heard that that's the case. So there's still some confusion, like Libby was saying, but local governments here gave our Richland County districts enough cover to commence without going as rogue as some would think.
What have you heard, Adam, in Richland? Similar to what's going on in Charleston. I mean, are kids being told they can't come into the schools if they're not masked, or do you know how that's being enforced, or what the situation is there?
Yeah, I was actually at an elementary school yesterday. Schools started across Richland County yesterday, and the impression that I got is everybody knows what COVID is, what it's about, but there's also a big sense of hope and optimism that we know what COVID's out there, but we want to get through this year. Districts really seem committed to staying in person as long as they can, and you walk into a school and it sort of has all the trappings of a non-COVID year school, but also, we're seeing hand sanitizer stations, we're seeing cafeterias turned into spaces for classrooms, we're seeing tables with masks. Whether or not, since there's a mask mandate in place by the city and the county, the can you come to school without a mask question is a moot point here in Richland County. But I've talked to several parents yesterday who have said to me, yeah, it's the summer, they're uncomfortable, but I personally feel like I will feel safer dropping my child off, especially at an elementary school we're talking about. So, I think that folks are understanding, the need to comply with whatever their districts are telling them.
Yeah. Up in Greenville, Stephanie, it's we sort of have some very distinct parts of the state. There's the Low Country in Charleston, there's the Midlands, and then Greenville is kind of its own thing too. So tell us a little bit about what Greenville County schools are doing and how parents and administrators up there are handling COVID in the start of school.
Yeah, so unlike my colleagues' school districts that are maybe taking more of a rebel stance, as you said, Greenville County School District is abiding by what our superintendent has called state law. It's the budget provisos that Libby was outlining earlier. So there are no mask mandates for Greenville County schools, but masks can be worn out of choice. So when I was on the ground on Tuesday, that's when Greenville County schools started. I was at an elementary school and it was a mixed bag, I would say. A lot of students did come in wearing masks. Some parents who were dropping off their students also were wearing masks. And the parents that I talked to personally were concerned about their students. They had first graders, second graders, and they were very much encouraging their students to wear masks and telling them you need to keep this on. We're unsure if your classmates will wear masks, but we want you to. And for those who are unfamiliar, if you're not from the upstate or Greenville County, we are the largest school district in the state. And so we service about 73,000 kids. We have about 6,000 employees. We have 94 schools and centers. So we are very large here in Greenville. And yeah, I mean, it varied as well. Some of my colleagues were on the ground at high schools, and with high schoolers having a little more autonomy than younger students, there were almost no masks from what my colleague was observing. And for those who were wearing masks, it was funny, I guess you could say. One of the quotes that he pulled when he asked the student, "Are you worried about COVID?" She said, "Not really." And he was like, "But you're wearing a mask." And she said, "Because I didn't have time to put on makeup this morning." And so it was more of like a cosmetic problem than I am worried about COVID problem. And so we don't know if that's going to change anytime soon as we see other districts handle this, but we haven't heard anything from our board about changing or going against state law.
Makes sense. Yep. And probably not surprising, again, if you know kind of the lay of the land in South Carolina. As this just popped up in the chat here, for those of you who are joining us, if you would like to ask a question as we go today, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. If you just click on that, you can pop your question in. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. We've also had questions that came in ahead of time from readers, and so we'll address those as well. I'm going to start with one of those. So Fred Palm wants to know a little bit more about how schools are handling testing and rapid testing in their schools. So maybe I'll start with Libby in Charleston. What are you hearing on that? How's that process work? Who's responsible for reporting those things? Can you kind of give us a lay of the land there?
Yeah, so as far as testing goes, in the Charleston area, Charleston County School District is offering testing for students. I believe they have the PCR rapid test, so that's the one that goes up your nose. And so they're using that test, and basically if students come into the nurse's office and they're feeling sick and they have COVID symptoms, they'll administer a test to those students. It's also the same goes for if a kid's been exposed to the virus. So yeah, that's how it goes in Charleston County. And then my understanding is that in both Berkeley County and Dorchester schools, they have referrals sent to clinics throughout the area where kids can get tested. But as kids test positive, or staff as well, that's reported to the school district. And then the districts have like a cohorting and quarantine protocol. The interesting thing about that this year that's different than last year is that unvaccinated students are required to quarantine if they're exposed to the virus, if they're considered a close contact, so within 6 feet for about 15 minutes. But vaccinated students don't have that same requirement. Vaccinated students can continue going to school if they're exposed to the virus, as long as they don't show symptoms. So once they start showing a cough or a sneeze or those kinds of things, they will have to be sent home to quarantine. But if there is that kind of advantage, aside from the protection you get from the vaccine, there's the advantage of not having to be sent home from school with that. So
makes sense. Stephanie, is that similar to what they're doing in Greenville, or how would you describe what's happening up there?
I would say that's very similar, especially the latter half of what Libby was saying in regards to vaccinated versus unvaccinated students in showing proof of vaccination in order to have shortened quarantines. In terms of testing, we also, those who test positive will report that to the school. And this is an interesting development that we won't necessarily see play out in the next week or so, but our most recent school board meeting, committee of the whole meeting, was canceled or postponed due to COVID problems. And so during that meeting, they were supposed to be discussing using ESSER funding for getting PCR testing interpreter. So it could potentially lessen the quarantine time for students if they get a PCR test on campus. And so that has not yet been voted on, talked about. And so that's just merely an action that is stated on their website, but that is something that they're considering doing, hoping to limit the amount of time students are not in school. And so that's something to stay tuned for if you are in the Greenville County area. But yeah, in terms of quarantine and isolation periods, those, like Libby was saying, have been changed from last year due to the chance of vaccination.
Sense. Adam, similar situation in Richland and Lexington.
Yeah, I know we have a lot to go through, so I'll just say what my
Yep.
colleague said is pretty much exactly what I would say. So yes.
But private schools are a little bit different. Jennifer Hooks wrote in, wanted to know, how are are they required to report their positive tests? How are they handling testing? Has Libby, heard anything more about what's happening in our private schools?
So private schools, I'm not entirely sure if they're required to report. I know that all positive tests from private schools that are reported to DHEC are reported publicly on DHEC's dashboard. So you can go online. I don't know the exact address, but we can maybe link it in a second. And you can see a map of South Carolina, and it shows both public and private schools, and it gets updated, I think, on Tuesdays and Fridays with the number of students and staff at those schools that are have tested positive. So that's my understanding. I don't believe there's any requirements on private schools to report to parents or teachers or the community if someone tests positive, but that is kind of the understanding for you. If you want to know more about what's going on in the private schools, you can visit DHEC and kind of see the numbers.
Gotcha. Yeah, as Lauren pointed out on our call last week, where we talked a little bit more about COVID-19 in general, the DHEC website is really rich with information. Not all of it that we will or can report every day. So if you're really interested in that stuff, you can go to that website, dig in. There's a lot of data there, way more than we'll be able to cover today, but it is a very useful resource for everyone. One of the questions that just came in the live Q&A, and again, a reminder to everybody, there's a little Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen if you want to ask a question. This comes from Catherine McDonald, and it's one I've heard a lot about, and I think I know the answer to, but I'm gonna kick it to you guys to respond. So what happens to the kids who need to quarantine during school? Are they able to join classes via Zoom like they were last year, or are they kind of on their own and almost like being out sick? What's going to happen there? Adam, do you want to take a first stab at that one if you know?
Yeah. So one thing I will say is all of our districts, I think, have vastly ramped up their virtual learning capacities just because of what we went through last year and the potentiality of what could happen down the road. So I actually spoke to one of my districts yesterday. Students who are quarantining or at home, they're still going to be able to virtually learn. Whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, I'm not certain. But I know that districts have invested in new programs, new software, made sure that kids have mobile hotspots so that that learning gap, won't be exacerbated for the amount of time that a student is at home. That's a big deal, especially in parts of rural Lexington and Richland counties where we have students who might find themselves in that situation. So it's not a full-fledged virtual academy like last year, but it is, you're not going to be sitting at home for 2 weeks falling behind your classmates.
Makes sense. Stephanie, is that kind of what you're hearing in Greenville?
That is very similar, other than the fact that for students who are absent due to COVID, their teachers have the option to live stream class, but it's not required. So like Adam was saying, they are required to give their student makeup work, but are not required to live stream class. So it could be asynchronous catch up.
Gotcha. Libby, is that similar to what's happening in Charleston, Berkeley, and Dorchester? You've got 3 S you got to worry about.
Yeah, that's the similar thing. They use Canvas, which is an online software, to kind of keep up with classes. And one important thing to note with this too is that students are not going to be counted. It's not being counted against them, or it's not counted as an absence if students are being quarantined. So there's no risk of students going truant or something like that because they can't be in school because they're in quarantine. That doesn't count. So
I should say that Lexington 1 just approved that set policy that Libby was talking about at their meeting this week. So, we're seeing a lot of districts act very similar in these situations. But, just to go to Libby's point about the absences, because I'm sure that's a question for people.
Yeah. So another one I hear a lot, and I think I warned y'all I might ask about this one is, parents are we're, I think, excited for kids to go back to school in person. I think, as a parent who had a kid who did some remote stuff last year, that was hit and miss. So I think a lot of parents were very very much anticipating getting back to school in person. But then I've heard a lot from a couple of parents as we got to this date, as we got to the first day of school, even after their kids got to the first day of school itself, started to have second thoughts and wanted to see about how did they, if that's the case, and they want to get their kid enrolled in some kind of online program, how does that work? I'm hearing a lot of parental confusion over that topic. Libby, do you want to start with that one? And what's the situation, at least in Charleston County schools, if you decide today, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with this, I want my kid online?
Yeah, so it's a little different per district here. Berkeley County Schools decided earlier this year that they would not be doing virtual learning specifically because of COVID. They still do virtual for certain classes, like if you're a high schooler who wants to take a class that's not available in person, you can take it online, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the situation over there. In Dorchester, they have their own virtual school. They did conclude enrollment for that in last March, but I believe if you reach out to Dorchester and you just explain your situation, you could probably consider some other options. In Charleston County, in Charleston County, it's a similar thing. So they have their own virtual school. It's called Low Country Virtual. It's actually kind of a partner program with other districts in the area. And that's for K through 8. And so the enrollment for that's complete, but the district is open to having virtual school options for parents who decided later and closer to the school year that they wanted that. So they're allowing parents to email the district and just say that, you know, I have a 3rd grader who's interested in virtual learning. Whether or not they're able to stand up a classroom for virtual learning for those students depends on the interest and the demand for it. So if they just have 3 kids, they're not going to put up a classroom. But if they have 20 or 30, then they might do that for 3rd graders or for whichever grade. And then for high school in Charleston, you go to your school counselor and they'll enroll you course by course kind of in virtual school. So high schoolers can be all virtual. It's just more of a individualized approach because high school courses are so individualized anyway. So.
Mm-hmm. And then South Carolina does have an online academy as an option as well. Is my understanding. Is that correct? Does anybody know?
Yes. There's actually several. I'm not going to name them, but I will say my inbox has been kind of filled with sales pitches from these online schools saying, "Hey, have you considered writing about us?" and letting your, to sort of go to what you were talking about for the folks that want that long-term virtual consistency.
So what is happening in Richland and Lexington, Adam? Have you heard that question come up a lot? And what are parents there being told if they are having second thoughts now that school's here?
Well, I will say, I think that Lexington, Richland 5 particularly had a very came out of the gate strong, a very good virtual program that people liked, which was sort of a blessing and a curse because it's very expensive to run to the level that they would like. But, I was mentioning earlier, we'll find the link for you guys. The Department of Education recommended putting a cap on virtual enrollment this year because, despite what we're talking about with masks, the prevailing sentiment is we want kids in school face to face. So, I was talking to my PIO yesterday and my spokesperson yesterday in Richland 1. She said that this year, the cap, for example, it's 500 kids. And I said, last year, how many did you have? Anecdotally, they had at one point, I think at the peak, almost 3,000, for example. So it is sort of first come, first serve basis. They are willing to assess students individually, but they are not laying down the infrastructure for a virtual permanent option. It's just not something that any of my districts are interested in exploring.
Makes sense. Stephanie, is that what's happened up in Greenville? I would imagine it's probably pretty similar.
It's similar to Columbia. Yes, there is a cap on number of students allowed in our e-learning program. It's 5% of our 73,000 students. And so that puts it about 3,600, 3,700 students that are allowed to be in that program. And currently I checked in this morning to see how many are enrolled, and it's about 2,800, a little give or take a few students. And yeah, our school district is trying to avoid e-learning at all costs. They said they'll restrict it unless it's inclement weather or other small short-term circumstances will they implement district-wide e-learning. So that's what it's looking like. They reopened e-learning applications because it closed over the summer, reopened it at the beginning of August as parents were growing increasingly concerned after CDC and DHEC guidelines coming out. And then it was just a matter of interest and trying to make sure staffing was in place. But right now they're below the cap, so they're okay.
Makes sense. I had a question from Jennifer here on the live Q&A, and she said, I've heard the terms quarantine and isolation being thrown around sometimes simultaneously. What do those mean? What's the differences and what are the distinctions between being in quarantine and being in isolation? Does anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I can talk about this. I was a health reporter in my last job, so I got really familiar with these. But yeah, so as far as quarantine goes, my understanding is that quarantine is for people who have been exposed to the virus. So that's when you stay within your house for 14 days, because that's the incubation period where the virus can kind of take hold and show up on a test. Isolation is more of a term used for people who are to confirm positive for that virus, so that you have it. So those people should be isolating, and like ideally they'd be isolating in their room or somewhere where they really want to interact with their family. A person in quarantine might be able to kind of be a little bit, go somewhere with a mask, to the kitchen or whatever, but person in isolation probably shouldn't do that. And isolation tends to also be a 10-day thing now with recent CDC recommendations, because they found that it takes about 10 days for it to be contagious, and then it goes away. So you're kind of stuck with a longer stay if you're put in quarantine. That's my understanding of it. So.
Well, we're at 12:26. We're supposed to go for a half hour. I was hoping we would get to more than just COVID, but that's where a lot of the questions were about. But I do want to ask, because I know all three of you spent some time this week at schools in your districts. First day, second day. And it seems like it's been an interesting mix of people being very excited to be back in person because of the challenges that online school presented, but also a lot of apprehension. So I'll start with Stephanie, because you mentioned you and the team of up there at the Post-Courier Greenville had kind of fanned out around the region. What were you seeing? What were you hearing? What was the mood like among both teachers and administrators, and then parents and students?
Sure. So I was at East North Street Academy in Greenville, and it is what you would call like a neighborhood school. So a lot of parents and students walk to school. And so I was able to see a breadth of people rather than just students coming off of a bus or in a carpool line. And East North Street was hosting a block party. So they were really leaning into this excitement. And what the block party looked like was they allowed their students to take photos with a mascot and walk down a red carpet. And there was a DJ. And so they were really trying to amp up the optimism opposed to the apprehension. And so, but when talking to parents, there was the mix of both. And so one couple was noting how they homeschooled their child last year and how it really did a number on his social life and like his social being, and they worried about that. And so they said he was very excited, but we're the same couple to note that they're also quite nervous that their student might not always keep on his mask because he's so young. And so I think that could be representative perhaps of multiple families in my district, but that was just one sample size.
Makes sense. Adam, same thing up in Lexington, Richland. What were you hearing from both teachers and students and parents?
One thing I think that some of us tend to fail to forget. We know what the Delta variant is and what it can do. But sometimes I think we forget that kids want to be kids, right? I showed up at a school yesterday, Forest Heights Elementary, first day of kindergarten for Zaimir. Easley is his last name. He had a mask on that was bigger than his face. Didn't care that I was a reporter, didn't know who I was. All he wanted to do was show me his new shoes and his backpack and tell me what his favorite color was. And that's why, and who his teacher, that's I think for the children who are going to school, it's such an inherent part of who they are and what they're used to that it's easy to see why districts are saying it's imperative that we keep kids in school, and I saw that a lot yesterday. Granted, I was in an elementary school, but I saw excitement. Kids, wanted to know, who their teacher was, what their textbooks were. So, yeah, kind of what Stephanie was saying. There's certainly an error of apprehension, but it's much more amongst the adults as it should be. They want the kids to sort of be as insulated from it as possible. And I saw that vibe came across very direct yesterday in Columbia.
It makes total sense. And that's a good point, that Adam brought up there as part of that And I'll maybe let Stephanie address this as we try to wrap up. But Libby, I'm sorry, address this as we try to wrap up. But the overwhelming guidance appears to be both from the health side and the education side that despite the variant, despite the challenges that COVID presents, that it's still recommended and better for kids to be in school in person. Is that your basic understanding of where we still are? And can you talk a little bit about maybe why that is?
Yeah, I think everyone on all sides of the issue agrees that what they want is a school year that looks as normal as possible with kids in school. And for, when I've spoken to parents and teachers, that's really been their focus, especially, a lot of parents are a little apprehensive because their kids, I've spoken to some parents with students who were in all virtual last year, and they, saw their kids really kind of struggle to connect with other kids their age, and they had to turn on Zoom and do class that way, and they didn't get to talk about anything other than school with their teachers. It just felt so, like it wasn't great for them. And so I think that, the parents really want to see their kids thrive. They want to see their kids, have social development and social emotional development as well as educational development. And everyone agrees that the best way to do that is to have them in schools. And so it's really what it comes down to is how you want that to look when they're in the schools. And so it's really interesting just to see, because people are really divisive right now, but it seems like that's the one thing that's kind of uniting everyone, is that they want their kids to be in schools with other kids so they can get to know each other and kind of feel some normalcy.
Makes total sense. And that's probably a good place to try to wrap up here at 12:30. Just a reminder to everybody, this has been recorded. We'll send an email to everybody who registered, even if you weren't on the live call today, so you can watch it later or forward it on to other people. There will be other resources included in that email, contact information for all the reporters here that did a great job of explaining what's happening in their school districts. If you want to reach out to any one of them with questions or story tips, please do so. And again, there'll be some other information that's shared in that email. Of course, we're blessed here at the Post and Courier to have reporters all fanned out all across the states. Stephanie in Greenville, Adam in Columbia, Libby in Charleston, and we have reporters in Myrtle Beach too. All that's thanks to our subscribers and our donors. So we appreciate you if you're on the call here and are a subscriber and donor. And again, I always have to pitch the last part of which is, if you're not, we'd really love to count you as one of those folks. You can do that at postandcourier.com/subscribe, postandcourier.com/donate. Thank you for your support, and thank you to this great team. I think this is really useful information. I'm sorry we weren't able to dig into more of the learning gaps and the challenges that the districts are going to face this year, because those are many. And maybe we can have this group back later this fall to talk a little bit about how the school year is going and the challenges that our teachers, administrators, parents, and students are all facing. It's going to be a very interesting year. There's still a lot we don't know. Libby will probably be updating her story about what's going on in Charleston schools later today. Still a lot of unknowns, but as Libby, I think, so eloquently said, the overriding goal here appears to be to get kids back into the classrooms. So thank you for listening today. That email will come with additional information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us with anything else you might be thinking about, or story tips, etc. Otherwise, have a great rest of your afternoon, and thank you for joining us today.
Being a local journalist in 2020 is as much of a challenge as it is a necessity and an honor. The Post and Courier has been doing fearless and uncompromising journalism for almost 200 years. This is not just a job that ends when the sun goes down for anybody that works here, and it shows in everything that the Post and Courier produces. An investment in the Post and Courier is an investment in your own curiosity. But when you pay for a subscription to the Post and Courier, you get unfettered access to the best reporting across South Carolina, from Charleston to the upstate, and you're financing South Carolina's definitive news source.